This video is going to show you how to deploy the AutoLab on the Fusion that you've already set up. So you've watched the previous video where we set up the networking. Now we've got to get the AutoLab itself set up. We need to copy the files that make up the AutoLab into the right location on our Mac. Here we have the download files. We'll need a few things beyond just the AutoLab download. We're going to start though with the VMware Workstation build of AutoLab, which produces, as I extract the zip file, produces this lab local folder. I'm just going to take a copy of the lab local folder and go into my documents folder, and I'm going to create a new folder in documents called virtual machines. And then in that folder I'm going to paste my lab local folder. Now in that lab local folder you see we've got folders again for each of the virtual machines that make up the AutoLab. The difficulty is that those virtual machines are not actually the way that my VMware Fusion expects them to be. So what I'm going to do is come in here into the utilities folder and get myself a terminal window. And I have some handy dandy little snippets of script that I'm going to use. Now these are extracted out of the deployment guide. They're not what's exactly in the deployment guide with version 1.5 because they didn't quite work for me. But these will be in the updated deployment guide and I will post them onto the AutoLab website. The first thing I've got to do is not make typos along the way and not have capital C's in the change directory command. Copy that one, then paste it in, and that takes us to the directory which we saw before, full of the folders for each of the virtual machines. What we need to do then is rename all of those folders that don't currently end in .vmware VM to actually say .vmware VM as their folder name. So that lovely little piece of script will do this for me. And fairly much instantaneously you can see that all the folders now say .vmware VM. The second piece of script is because the VMX file has the network definition as vmnet3 all lowercase and the VMware Fusion expects it to be all uppercase. So I'm going to grab another piece of script. This one does come cleanly out of the deployment guide at version 1.5, paste it in, and that will have changed all of the network config on all of my virtual machines. There's no visible change for that though. So I'll exit out of this shell, this terminal shell, minimize away him, and then I'll come back into my documents folder where I'll find my virtual machines lab local folder, and you can see now all of those folders have an icon that indicates that they're Fusion virtual machines. To start the build, we start with the NAS virtual machine. We power him on and we say that we copied it. It's always safest to say I copied here. This means that we'll create a new virtual machine. Let's get a new MAC address, whereas if I say I moved it, it retains its existing MAC address. Within this copy of Fusion, I've told it not to offer to upgrade my virtual machines for me. I just don't want the bother of changing things as I go, particularly with virtual machines like the AutoLab that are extremely disposable virtual machines. NAS virtual machine starts up. Takes a little while to start up. Now I need to get back to my AutoLab folder, so it's back on the desktop, AutoLab, because I want some of the remaining files to go onto my NAS share when this machine comes up. Just confirm in here the network adapters on this machine. VMnet3 is my network, which is correct. It's on the right subnet, so that looks like that should all be happy. And now my FreeNAS box is coming up nicely. It's mounting its file systems. Lots of patience as we start up. And now we're ready to go. So as always, this machine's on 192.168.199.7. So if I come back into the Finder and I connect to a server. Very important to connect to the server as an SMB server. And I'm going to connect to 192.168.199.7/build as the share name. This is where we cross our fingers and hope everything works out correctly and that I have an IP address on the right subnet. Connect as a guest And there it is. There's my build share as I expect a build share to be. So what have I got to do? I need to start by copying in PowerCLI installer. PowerCLI installer needs to come into the root directory. The VMware Vim setup, that's my vCenter, that goes into my Vim55 folder, being as I'm deploying ESXi 5.5 and vSphere 5.5. Away it goes copying in. Good thing I'm copying from one fast SSD to the same fast SSD inside a virtual machine. Copy time will be restricted by the fact that the NAS virtual machine is severely RAM limited, as all of the virtual machines are by default as we build. And then I need my vMvisor ISO. That's the ESXi installer, so I'm going to place that in the ESXi 5.5 folder. And then since I don't think I'm going to be deploying VMware View on here, I'm just going to copy in my Win2K3 ISO. It's my 32-bit Windows 2003 ISO. Did that go in the right place? Yes, it's going. Really? It's got a lock on it. Let's try that again. Hope that doesn't dump it in the VM Tools folder. This is my first week using a Mac as my full-time computer, so I'm a little slow on some things. And that has, hasn't it? No, the ISO is not in there. It isn't there. Okay. The other thing is that the default automate ini file that's here in the automate folder is not terribly useful. It doesn't have all the product key information in here, and consequently I'm going to take my automate ini file that I bring with me and I'm going to overwrite the existing automate ini file. One thing that's missing so far is that I don't yet have VMware Tools folder populated with a VMware Tools package to install. The way to find that is to go and find the VMware Fusion object in the application folder, and then right click or two-finger tap on it and say show package contents. So this opens up the archive that is the executable, and we can drill into here into the library and into the ISO images, and we can see all the VMware Tools ISOs are in here. What we need to do is grab ourselves the Windows ISO and dump it down into the VM Tools folder. Okay. Now I've got a populated build share. I've got my ESXi. I've just put 5.5 in here to make it quicker. We've got the vCenter installer. Again, I've left them as ISOs. The vCenter and domain controller builds will extract these ISOs, and actually we'll be able to work from those extracted copies there on. Okay, so now I've got a populated build share. I can come back into my documents folder, into my virtual machines, and I can start looking at building my domain controller virtual machine. If I open up my domain controller, and this is fine. I never want to be warned about other virtual machines running. Multiple virtual machines is one of the things I want to do. So one of the things you'll see is that initially, because the ISO is disconnected, and you can see the error message saying it couldn't find the ISO in that lab local folder, this is the folder on my build machine, so of course it doesn't exist here. Consequently, on this virtual machine, I'm going to need to make some changes to that ISO. I'm going to need to then go and browse for the ISO that I want. Now I put it on my desktop in the AutoLab folder, and then I have the Windows Server 2013. There it is. Come on. open him. Okay. Enable the CD-ROM drive, and then I should be able to close this out, and I should be able to press any key in here and have it happily build my domain controller. Okay. Same process will be required for all of the Windows virtual machines. They'll need to have the ISO connected to the CD-ROM drive, and then they'll be able to boot from the ISO. And of course, the floppy's already connected, so the unattended file is there. From here on in, it's really a case of repeating the same processes, just powering on the virtual machines as you need them, and letting the normal AutoLab automation carry on and make your life easier.